Hi there. I thought that it might be interesting to take a look at what societal systems are supporting and progressing photography as a whole. Probably for most of last century, magazines and books were bought and consumed by huge audiences, and photography was central to their success. By the late 1990s, media had evolved to such an extent that there were very few strong publications left, and the future of photography seemed vague and dispersed. In the early 2000s, fine art galleries opened their doors to photography, and for a brief period, art fairs were dominated by this medium. So the question is now, 20 or so years after this shift, is the greater photography community happy with where it's landed up? And are there other ways in which we can develop and promote photography? And is the strongest work actually rising to the top? Apart from the art world, there's been a somewhat quieter initiative that's been gaining momentum over the past few decades. And an increasing amount of attention and funds have been directed towards expanding photographic archives. This development has in the main been spearheaded by universities and other art-based institutions. Compared with the art world, this enterprise is the poor relative, and it certainly doesn't receive the same amount of hype. But over time, it might evolve into an alternative platform through which photography can be explored and developed. During this video, I'm going to include sections from an interview that I did with veteran photographer, curator, and photographic archivist Paul Weinberg.
They say that the camera never lies, but it can stretch the...
I think it's best to start off, Paul, with you as a photographer, how things have changed during the last 40 years. In the 80s and 90s, documentary photography wasn't really part of the fine art system. But over time, and possibly late 90s, early 2000, that changed. And how has that affected you as a photographer?
Let me start off by telling you a story. You know, I was pretty much involved in the collective photographic movement in the 1980s in South Africa. And we would have a number of exhibitions, part of the anti-apartheid journey. But our sort of feelings at the time, you know, the gallery was this bourgeois concept. We thought in radical terms we should have our photographs shown in community halls, and the gallery was, you know, kind of a no-no. Having said that, with our exhibitions that got sort of international recognition and profile, we soon found ourselves in these really esteemed galleries around the world. So the sort of conversation from a very early stage in my career shifted from the gallery being a kind of seen as inaccessible to being actually a potential platform for spreading the message. And that's actually what happened. Obviously, you know, I mean, now with hindsight, galleries have to make money, they have to sell photographs. But, you know, we were sort of coming from this radical position, and we realized it's actually all part of the same conversation. So we sort of quietly forgot our sort of radical position. I think the shift came in the late 90s, and it was no longer this divide between documentary photography and conceptual photography. The prominent photographers at the time, you know, of our transition were mainly documentary photographers. So in a way, that's how we sort of seep into this conversation and break the divide between fine art and documentary.
Give us an idea how you shifted from being a photographer to now being a photographer and a curator archivist.
It happened for me, you know, because in the early 2000s, it became very difficult to make a living as a photojournalist, which was my fallback position. And so I had to like review, think about what I was doing. And That's when I went back to school, if you like, and I went to Duke University and I studied, which gave me the opportunity then to enter into the archival system. It also gave me an opportunity to think. As photojournalists, we spent less time looking at our work, critically putting bodies of work together. So that was a good process for me.
Because the research into photographic archives is often unconstrained by financial and time factors, it has the potential to offer explorations on multiple levels. One example is interplays. One can investigate links within a single photographer's body of work or within different bodies of work when looking at a photographer's total production. Then this can be extended to comparisons between photographers or over time between generations of photographers. What do you feel the archive system can offer photography as a whole?
As I got involved in the archive, I realized that there's incredible depth and value in the archive. It also occurred to me that the fine art world, while it had done a lot for photography and a lot for photographers, was also somewhat exclusive in the sense that to create a brand or a particular photographer required the exclusion of others. It still bothers me and it sits uncomfortably with me. If you look at the archive in general and its value, in the last few decades, there have been photographers discovered like Mike Disfarmer from Arkansas, who had this incredible studio portrait business. He passed on his photographs, somehow landed up in the mayor's office. Yet they were these incredible images. He never thought of himself as a fine art photographer, but they became part of the fine art world. The same can be said for Vivian Mayer, who had this great passion for photography, and her work also became part of the fine art vocabulary. And then, you know, closer to South Africa, we've had great vernacular photographers who haven't actually also been acknowledged. So again, it speaks to the kind of hype and branding that comes with the sort of fine art practice that, in my opinion, quite often results in the exclusion of other very valuable and worthy photographers.
I was listening to a podcast with Stefan Simkovits, a collector from LA, and he said something really interesting. He said the branding of the gallery world turns photographers into celebrities. And he said celebrity culture is essentially a propaganda arm of the corporate state effectively. Celebrities are trapped within a very specific role. And if they migrate out of that role, then their value falls away. What do you feel about that statement?
No, I think he's completely spot on. And, you know, he would know. I mean, he's right in the traffic. And he's one of the kind of foremost collectors in the United States. There are a lot of pressures on, you know, photographers to become exclusive by the gallery and then become celebrities, and that requires a particular kind of dance. You know, again, works against my perspective as a curator and an archivist. You know, I often just find material that's just brilliant of photographers who are not known, who haven't been exposed. And I work very hard to give those photographers a voice in the world.
Do they get the recognition? Is there a platform within the archival photography system that allows a wide audience to appreciate this work and to engage with it? Or do you think the archival system is kind of seen as something which is restricted to universities and dusty institutions?
And bland. I think that's an extremely valid point. So this, let's say, symbiotic relationship between the archive and the fine art world is not closed. There are some very good examples that I can share with you. I mean, the one is the Ernest Cole archive. The Ernest Cole archive was considered, an important archive and placed in a particular sort of pigeonhole. But then when the archive was exposed and the images became more and more known, they connected with the fine art world. I'm just using that as an example of how an archive could be written off, but then it gets a life of its own.
Can you see now or foresee in the future when there will be an avenue for photographers, possibly who have produced a decent body of work, that they're able to move through the archive system in order to reach the fine art system? Do you think that's possible?
Well, I think there's got to be a real change and a shift, because it's my observation that the fine art world is a pretty closed system. And, photographers go from biennale to biennale, from art museum to art museum. And there's generally very little interest in looking beyond this core set of photographers who've been found or who are known to be important photographers. So that requires a lot more courage and a lot more innovation on the part of curators in the world. And, I think it's also tragic that, when a photographer passes on, that's when, people suddenly become interested in a photographer's life.
Obviously, curators need to look a little bit wider. How can one facilitate that process? Because possibly they don't know.
No, that's a very good point as well. And I think it's also up to archivists, curators, people with a passion and interest in photography to do the work, to animate these spaces.
Yeah, I also think there's a lot of lazy journalism within the art world, not just related to photography. So is there a way to bring archives closer to those people that are making these kind of artistic decisions?
Kind of what I do in my work at the Photography Legacy Project is I, take these eclectic archives and I get them digitized, and then they're exposed to a platform. My hope is that with that exposure comes not just research and education interest, but also an opportunity for people to see this work and reimagine it.
Okay, Paul, I think we're going to leave it there. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Graham.
Rarity and exclusivity is at the core of the business model for fine art galleries. And this is understandable from a financial perspective. It's similar to the diamond industry. They have to create an illusion of rareness in order to demand the high prices. A secondary system has developed around these galleries that is dependent on the associated wealth and prestige. Curators, art writers, and academics feed off the system and at the same time reinforce it. We all have to try to make a buck, so I'm not judging their business practice. Rather, my question is, should the advancement of photography be left in the hands of people whose primary motivations are financial? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.